Want you there, my dad said, his voice eerily calm, his tone as casual as if he were commenting on the weather instead of looking me in the eye and confirming that, after everything I had done, after every dollar I had handed over, after every time I had chosen to put their needs before my own, they had deliberately chosen to exclude me. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly that my fingers ached, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and devastation, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I had just heard. I had spent the past year giving them $600 a week, every single week, without fail. That was over $30,000 in 12 months, more than enough to cover their mortgage, more than enough to keep them comfortable, more than enough to ensure that they never had to worry about whether the lights stayed on or whether they could afford a night out. And through it all, I had never questioned it, never hesitated, never asked for anything in return except for the belief that I was part of their family, that I was doing what a good daughter was supposed to do, that my sacrifices meant something. But none of it had mattered. Not when it came time for them to book an expensive, luxury-filled vacation, a picture-perfect trip with warm beaches, endless drinks, and smiling family photos that I hadn't even known existed until I saw them plastered all over social media. I had been at home, scrolling through my phone, sipping coffee on a quiet Saturday morning, when the first photo popped up on my screen, a group shot of my parents, my younger sister, my cousins, and even some distant relatives I barely spoke to. All of them standing together on a sunlit beach, their arms wrapped around each other, their smiles wide, their happiness practically radiating through the screen. The caption read, "Family time is everything. So grateful for this trip." I blinked at the words, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing, my chest tightening as realization settled in like a heavy stone. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even been told. They had planned it, booked it, packed their bags, boarded their flights, and never once thought to mention it to me. My hands trembled slightly as I kept scrolling, each new photo a fresh slap to the face, each update a reminder that while I had been sitting at home, believing I was an important part of their lives, they had been somewhere else entirely, living a life that didn't include me. I told myself there had to be some mistake, that maybe I had missed something, that maybe they had assumed I was too busy, or that I wouldn't have wanted to go. My heart pounded as I pulled up my dad's number, my fingers hesitating over the screen for just a second before I pressed call, my breath unsteady, my stomach churning with something that felt dangerously close to panic. He answered after 2 rings, his voice relaxed, content, as if he were still on vacation, as if he weren't about to shatter whatever was left of my already fragile trust in them. "Hey, Jess," he said, his voice carrying that same effortless indifference he always had, the same tone he used whenever he was about to brush off something he knew I wouldn't like. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay even, pushing down the emotion threatening to choke me. "Hey, Dad," I said, my fingers tightening around the phone. "I saw the pictures. I didn't know you guys were going on a trip." There was a brief pause, a hesitation so slight that if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have missed it. Then, a small, unbothered chuckle. "Yeah," he said, as if it was nothing, as if it was normal to leave out your own daughter. "We decided to do something special this year." I forced out a laugh, though it didn't sound right, didn't feel real. "I mean, why didn't you tell me? I would have loved to come." Another pause. And then, the words that broke something inside me. "We didn't want you there." Silence. Loud, suffocating silence, so thick and so sharp that I could almost feel it cutting through me, feel it pressing against my chest, feel it wrapping around my throat like a noose. I blinked, certain I had misheard, certain I was losing my mind, certain that he hadn't actually just said that out loud. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my stomach twisting, my hands going numb, my body fighting against the realization that I had spent an entire year supporting people who had no problem throwing me away. My dad sighed, exhaling heavily, clearly already tired of this conversation, clearly irritated that I was making this a thing, clearly unbothered by the fact that his words were slowly ripping me apart. "It's not a big deal, Jess," he said, his tone dismissive, as if he hadn't just taken a knife to whatever was left of my trust. We just wanted to relax without any drama. You get that, right? Drama. That was what he called me being part of the family. I felt something inside me harden, something shift, something that had been bending under the weight of years of being used, of being dismissed, of being treated like I didn't matter. They had taken my money, smiled in my face, accepted my help without question, without hesitation, without gratitude, and then they had left me behind without a second thought. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts, my mind racing with 1,000 things I could say, 1,000 ways I could demand an explanation, 1,000 ways I could beg them to tell me I was wrong, that this wasn't what it seemed. But I didn't. I sat there, gripping my phone, swallowing back the rage and the hurt and the sheer humiliation of realizing that I had never really mattered to them at all. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing the words out carefully, making sure my voice didn't shake, making sure that this moment, the moment when I finally saw them for what they were, was burned into my memory forever. Got it, I said, my voice eerily calm, too calm. If you didn't want me there, then you don't need my money either. And before he could say anything, before he could backtrack, before he could try to manipulate me into believing that I was overreacting, I ended the call. I stared at the phone in my hand, the weight of it suddenly heavier than it had ever been, the silence in the room deafening, the emptiness settling deep in my bones. They didn't want me there. Fine. But in 24 hours, they were going to realize just how much they had lost. I woke up the next morning with the weight of my father's words still pressing down on me, the memory of his casual dismissal replaying in my head, each syllable cutting just as sharply as it had the first time. We didn't want you there. The sentence lingered, echoing over and over, but this time, instead of feeling like a wound, it started to feel like something else, like clarity, like proof, like the final confirmation of something I had always known but never wanted to accept. I sat up slowly, rubbing my temples, my mind already made up before I even fully opened my eyes. There was no anger anymore, no sadness, no disbelief, just a cold, steady realization that I was done. Done pretending, done making excuses, done giving to people who didn't see me as family, done sacrificing while they took without a second thought. I grabbed my phone, my fingers moving instinctively as I pulled up my banking app, scrolling to the automatic payments that had been draining my account every single week. I had never questioned it before, had never hesitated to send them money, had never even thought about what I could be doing with that extra $600 every week, because in my mind, that money had been helping my family, had been making sure they were okay, had been securing my place in their lives. But now, as I sat there, staring at the numbers on the screen, I saw it for what it really was, a payment for a love that didn't exist. With a few taps, I canceled every single transfer. It was done. For the first time in over a year, my parents wouldn't see a dime from me. I half expected to feel guilty, half expected to feel that familiar wave of doubt, that nagging voice in the back of my head whispering that maybe I was overreacting, that maybe I was being unfair, that maybe I should wait until I cooled down before making a decision this final. But no guilt came. No doubt crept in. Because for the first time, I saw them for what they were, takers, users, people who had never loved me the way I had loved them. I set my phone down, exhaling slowly, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, relief. And then I waited. I didn't say anything. I didn't text them to let them know. I didn't call to warn them that their money was gone. I simply let them carry on as if nothing had changed, let them sit in their ignorance, let them believe they were still in control. For days, I heard nothing. They still sent their usual messages, short, impersonal, nothing beyond the occasional "hope you're doing well," or "can you send it a little early this week?" As if they weren't aware of what they had done, as if they truly believed that I was too weak to walk away, too desperate for their approval to ever stop giving. It was almost laughable. I ignored them, let them think everything was fine, let them believe they hadn't completely destroyed any chance of me ever trusting them again. And for the first time in years, I watched my bank account start to grow instead of shrink. I had spent so long giving, so long sacrificing, so long convincing myself that my money belonged to them before it ever belonged to me, that I had never even considered what it would feel like to keep it, to use it for myself, to choose myself over them for once. I took myself out to dinner, bought groceries without checking my balance first, even let myself browse through stores without feeling guilty about wanting something just for me. And yet, through it all, I waited for the inevitable moment when they would finally notice what had been taken from them. Because I knew that moment was coming. I could feel it creeping closer, like a storm on the horizon, like a reckoning they never saw coming. They hadn't noticed the missing money yet, but they would. And when they did, I would be ready. The first missed payment slipped by unnoticed, just like I knew it would, because they had never once stopped to think about where the money was coming from, never once considered that it wasn't some infinite resource, never once imagined that the daughter they had dismissed so easily might have finally had enough. I had expected them to realize immediately, to panic, to reach out the moment the usual $600 didn't hit their account, but when days passed with nothing but the usual empty messages, short, meaningless check-ins that never asked how I was, never showed any sign that I was anything more than their personal ATM, I knew the truth. They weren't paying attention. They weren't worried, because they still believed they had control. They thought I was still theirs to use, still theirs to take from, still too desperate for their approval to ever take something back. Then the second payment came and went, and that's when the first crack appeared. I was sitting at my desk when the message popped up, a simple, clipped text from my mother, as if she were asking about the weather instead of realizing that her cash flow had suddenly disappeared. Did you forget to send the money this week? No greeting. No warmth. No acknowledgement that I hadn't spoken to them in days. Just straight to the point, straight to the thing they really cared about. I stared at the message for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, considering, just for a second, if I should answer, if I should give them the courtesy of an explanation, if I should tell them the truth so they could feel it sink in, so they could know that I had made a choice they couldn't undo. But then I put my phone down and let them wonder. I let them sit in the silence. A few hours later, another message came, this time less casual, this time with a bite of irritation, a hint of entitlement, a warning that they still thought they could control me. Jessica, we're waiting on the money. Can you send it now? Not can you help us? Not hey, is everything okay? Just send it now, like I was a bank account that had temporarily malfunctioned, like I was a machine they could reset. I didn't respond. The third missed payment hit like a slap to the face, like an alarm finally blaring in their heads, like a truth they couldn't ignore any longer. By the time I woke up that morning, my voicemail was already filled with frantic messages, each one more desperate than the last. The first was my mother, her voice sharp, her tone already bordering on anger, because how dare I make them worry, how dare I not explain myself, how dare I stop giving when they had already decided I was supposed to. Jessica, I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't funny. We have bills to pay, and you know that. Call me back. I deleted it without hesitation. The second voicemail was from my father, and his tone was different, less angry, more uncertain, more wary, as if he had finally started to understand that something had changed, that something had shifted, that I was no longer playing my part. Jess, we need to talk. Just call me, okay? Let's figure this out. Figure this out? As if this was some misunderstanding, as if they hadn't done this to themselves, as if I was supposed to feel bad for the consequences they had brought upon themselves. By the afternoon, the messages were relentless. Jessica, answer your phone. Jessica, we need to talk about this. Jessica, you can't just do this to family. And yet, not a single one of them asked how I was doing, not a single one of them acknowledged what they had done, not a single one of them apologized for leaving me behind. I could almost picture them, sitting in their house, staring at their dwindling bank account, confused, angry, still convinced that I was the problem, that I was the selfish one, that I was the one who had changed. They thought I was just a wallet. Now they were about to see what happens when that wallet closes for good. It took them longer than I expected to realize just how much damage had been done, how much they had depended on me without ever acknowledging it, how much they had taken from me without a second thought, assuming the well would never run dry. For the first week, their messages had been nothing but impatience, full of annoyance, full of entitlement, full of the belief that I had simply forgotten or was making a point I would eventually drop. But by the second week, something shifted, something in their tone changed, something that told me they had started to truly feel the weight of what they had lost. The first real sign came in the form of a voicemail from my father, one that was noticeably less angry, noticeably less demanding, noticeably more uncertain, his usual confidence replaced with something I had never heard from him before: worry. "Jessica, listen, I know you're upset, okay? But your mother and I are dealing with some financial things right now, and we really need you to call us back." This is serious. I didn't need to hear the details to know exactly what that meant. The bills were piling up. The credit cards were starting to get declined. The money they had so easily spent on their little family getaway had disappeared into thin air, and now there was nothing left. I imagined my mother standing in line at the grocery store, swiping her card with her usual confidence, not even considering for a second that it might not go through, only for the cashier to shake their head apologetically, only for the reality of the situation to start seeping into her bones. I pictured my father calling their bank, trying to smooth-talk his way into some kind of extension, only to be met with cold indifference, only to realize that for the first time in his life, he couldn't just rely on someone else to fix his mess. And the best part? I wasn't there to save them. Their texts became more frequent, more desperate, more erratic, jumping between anger and pleading, between blaming me and begging me to come back and fix everything. "Jessica, how could you do this to your own family? Jessica, we raised you better than this. Jessica, we don't know how we're going to keep up with everything. Please, just call us." Each one made me feel lighter. Each one made me realize how much I had been carrying, how much weight I had been holding, how much of their burden had been placed on my shoulders for years without me even realizing it. And then, just when I thought they had finally hit rock bottom, just when I thought they had no more tricks left to play, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my parents. It was my younger sister. I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether or not to pick up, already knowing exactly what she was going to say, already knowing that she had been sent as the family mediator, the one chosen to guilt-trip me into coming back. I sighed, but against my better judgment, I answered. "Jessica," she said, her voice instantly dropping into that soft, careful tone, the one she always used when she was trying to convince someone to do something they didn't want to do. I don't understand. What's going on with you?" I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me, unable to stop the wave of amusement that crashed over me at the sheer audacity of that question. "What's going on with me?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief, because how could she possibly ask that after everything they had done? "You mean besides the fact that our parents took my money for a year and then left me behind like I was nothing?" She exhaled, and I could hear the practiced patience in her breath, the carefully measured pause, the way she was already trying to spin the situation in their favor. "They didn't mean it like that," she said, her voice soft, like she was speaking to a child, like I was being irrational, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. "You're being really unfair about this, Jess. They're struggling right now. They need you." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, because I had been waiting for those words, because I had known all along that this was what it would come down to. "They need me?" I asked, pretending to consider it, pretending to mull it over, pretending for just a moment that I hadn't already made up my mind. "Well, that's funny, because when they were booking that trip, when they were packing their bags, when they were posting pictures of themselves drinking cocktails on the beach, they didn't need me then, did they?" "Jess," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said, my voice firm, unwavering, final. "They made their choice. Now they get to live with it." I didn't wait for her to respond. I just laughed again, a light, genuine laugh, a laugh filled with something that felt dangerously close to freedom, and then I hung up. For the first time, they understood. For the first time, they knew. For the first time, they felt what it was like to be the one left behind. I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up, standing on my doorstep like lost children, faces tight with desperation, voices carefully crafted to sound remorseful, bodies hunched under the weight of finally understanding just how much they had taken from me. They had called, they had texted, They had left voicemail after voicemail, each message dripping with panic, but I had ignored every single one, letting them sit in their own mess, letting them feel the kind of helplessness I had felt for years. The kind of helplessness that comes when you realize you were only ever valuable for what you could provide. When the knock finally came, sharp and insistent, rattling through my quiet apartment, I didn't flinch, didn't feel even the slightest trace of hesitation, didn't need a moment to gather myself. I already knew exactly how this was going to go. I walked to the door slowly, deliberately, letting them wait, letting them sweat, letting them understand that they were no longer the ones in control. When I opened it, my father was standing in front, his posture stiff, his hands clenched at his sides, his usual arrogance nowhere to be found. My mother stood slightly behind him, her eyes already glassy, her lips pressed into a tight, trembling line, as if she were preparing to put on the performance of a lifetime. For a moment, none of us spoke. They had expected me to be angry, had expected me to yell, had expected me to break down and demand answers, to lash out and throw their mistakes in their faces, because that would mean I still cared, that I still wanted something from them, that I was still looking for a way back. But I wasn't. And the silence made them uncomfortable. "Jessica," my father finally said, his voice low, his usual confidence replaced with something almost unfamiliar, uncertainty. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, making no effort to move aside, making no effort to make this easy for them, making no effort to hide the fact that I wasn't the same daughter they had thrown away like garbage. "Do we?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, keeping my voice calm, keeping my face unreadable, keeping my emotions locked behind the steel wall I had built the moment they told me they didn't want me there. My mother stepped forward then, reaching out slightly, as if she expected me to take her hand, as if she thought I would crumble at the sight of her distress, at the sight of her regret, at the sight of her standing there looking so small, so lost, so unlike the woman who had once ignored every sacrifice I had made for them. "Sweetheart, please," she whispered, and I almost laughed at the softness in her voice, at the sheer audacity of pretending that she had ever spoken to me like that before. "We're in trouble. The bills, everything, it's all falling apart. We didn't realize how much we relied on you, how much you were doing for us. And we're sorry. We're so sorry. Sorry." The word sat between us like a useless, broken thing, hollow and meaningless, an offering far too late, a weak attempt at undoing years of selfishness, years of taking, years of treating me like an afterthought. I let the silence stretch, watching them shift uncomfortably, watching them realize that the longer I stood there, unmoving, unbothered, untouched by their words, the less power they had. Then my father finally cracked. "Jessica," he said, his voice sharper now, more urgent, more desperate than I had ever heard it. "You don't do this to family. You don't just walk away when people need you." And that was it. That was the moment I knew, without a doubt, that they weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry for what they had lost. They were sorry that their safety net had disappeared. They were sorry that I had finally figured out the truth, that I didn't owe them anything. I took a slow breath, letting it settle in my chest, letting it remind me that I was free now, that I didn't have to carry their weight anymore, that I didn't have to keep breaking myself to build a life for people who had never once thought about what I needed. I met my father's eyes, held his gaze, made sure he heard me loud and clear when I said, "You didn't want me there? Well, I don't want you here." I saw the exact moment the reality hit him, saw the way his mouth opened slightly, as if he had expected something different, as if he had still believed that I would cave, that I would give in, that I would be the daughter they could always manipulate into coming back. But I wasn't that daughter anymore. I wasn't theirs anymore. I reached for the door, gripping the handle tightly, and for the first time, I watched panic flicker across my mother's face, watched as she realized I was truly about to shut them out, watched as she finally understood that this time, there would be no fixing what they had broken. I didn't hesitate. I didn't waver. I didn't even blink. I just closed the door in their faces. And I didn't feel guilty. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper in front of me, the pen resting between my fingers, waiting for the words to come, waiting for the anger to rise, waiting for the familiar ache of betrayal to settle deep in my chest the way it had so many times before. But as I sat there, letting the silence stretch around me, letting the weight of everything that had happened settle in my bones, I realized something that made my grip on the pen loosen, made my shoulders relax, made my breath come a little easier. I wasn't angry anymore. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't holding on to the bitterness, wasn't feeling the sharp sting of my father's words, wasn't replaying the moment my mother had tried to guilt me into saving them, wasn't hearing my sister's voice dripping with condescension as she tried to spin the situation in their favor. The pain had been real, the betrayal had been cutting, but now, as I sat in my own home, surrounded by things that belonged to me, in a life that no longer revolved around begging them to love me, I realized that I had already won. Still, I picked up the pen. I let the words come, let them spill onto the page, let them exist outside of me for the first time. For as long as I can remember, I have been the one who made sure you were okay. I gave without question, sacrificed without hesitation, carried the weight of every mistake you made, cleaned up the messes you refused to deal with, and never once did you stop to think about how much it was costing me. You didn't love me. You loved what I could do for you. And I was too blind, too desperate, too hopeful to see it for what it was. I paused, staring at the words, feeling the truth of them, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made, every time I had put them first, every moment I had convinced myself that if I just gave a little more, they would finally see me. And yet, despite it all, I wasn't broken. I kept writing. You called me selfish when I finally said no. You told me I was cruel for making you deal with the consequences of your own choices. You begged, you cried, you tried to make me feel like I was abandoning you, like I was turning my back on my own family, like I was supposed to keep giving even after you made it clear that you never wanted me. But I have finally realized something that I wish I had known years ago. Love doesn't demand sacrifice without offering anything in return. Love isn't supposed to feel like a debt I have to pay. And family? Family isn't blood. Family is who chooses you. And you never chose me. I sat back, exhaling slowly, letting the finality of it settle into my bones, letting the peace of it wash over me in a way that felt more satisfying than any revenge ever could. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and set it on the table beside me, but I knew, even as I did it, that I would never send it. Because they didn't need to read it. They already knew. They knew the moment I walked out of that house. They knew the moment they lost everything and realized I wasn't coming back to fix it. They knew the moment my father stood outside my door, his voice shaking with desperation, his arrogance shattered, his world crumbling around him, and I had simply looked him in the eye and shut the door in his face. They knew. And now, so did I. I picked up the envelope, held it between my fingers for a moment, then tossed it into the fireplace, watching as the flames licked at the edges, watching as the words turned to ash, watching as the last piece of them that lived inside of me burned away. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need them. I turned away from the fire, away from the past, away from the people who had never truly been mine to begin with. And as I walked into the next chapter of my life, I whispered the words that had once felt impossible, the words that now felt like freedom itself. Family isn't blood. It's who chooses you. And I choose to leave.